So NAD says, having too much certainty can sometimes blind us to the truth. It's good to exercise epistemic humility with complex situations. Yes, however, sometimes situations really aren't as complex as they appear to be, right? Many Efilis do advocate for a non-consensual end of everything. The only reason they don't agree with individual acts of harm is due to the possibility of societal backlash, but this might not always apply. Right, well, that's you calling them individual acts of harm, right? But like you say further on in this comment, causing unnecessary suffering is justified if it prevents more suffering. So, yeah, most Efilists who are saying that don't agree with individual acts of harm, right? Just as you put it, they don't agree with individual acts of harm, unless there's a net positive in terms of preventing more suffering than they cause. The reason they don't agree with them is due to the possibility of societal backlash. Well, I would say it's more than a possibility of societal backlash, but that's not something that's like the fault of the Efilists, right? Of the Efilists in question. That society itself has a huge amount of problems. One of the major ones being people are terrified of reality, right? Who's that person who said about human beings that brief but concise point, something like human beings cannot bear very much reality. Yeah, due to the possibility of societal backlash. But this might not always apply. What? Societal backlash might not always apply. No. It might not always apply. What's your point? It's true that there is a lot of suffering in the world. Unfortunately, many people these days would rather chase superficial pleasures instead of actually trying to fix issues such as climate change and growing wealth disparity. Well, yeah. What else are people supposed to do? There's so much misinformation and disinformation surrounding these things, like these issues such as climate change and growing wealth disparity. Those problems are too complex for the average person to do much about, right? I find myself in the same experiencing the same frustrations as you're expressing here, in the sense that the people around me literally drive me crazy sometimes with their ignorance and their complaining about certain situations, which you can observe their own actions and behavior, and what they buy and pay for in their own life is funding the very problems you're talking about here. But those things aren't going to change. Especially climate change, when there's so much debate about causes and who's so much debate about the real cause of it, how much of it is due to human action on the planet, how much is happening, how much of it is occurring naturally, how it's measured, who has to gain by saying what, all of that stuff. And you're just talking about that climate change is as if it's a human problem, right? but that's like in the big picture. That's not necessarily, climate change is not necessarily a bad thing, right? In terms of sentient beings in general, because climates change. Some species suffer detrimental effects because of that. Some go extinct. Other species thrive in that, and it improves their quality of life. So growing wealth disparity, yeah, but that's like a natural course of events. That's not going to happen, you know. Like, that's past changing. The general population have been so preoccupied with their own lives that they've allowed it to get way past the point of any return. Plus, the people who have real power, like, they've got everything locked down. They own all the media companies. They own, and because of that, like, it's pretty difficult to argue that they don't own pretty much almost own the individual psychology of people in general, right? They've got so much power of influence. So that's not something that's going to change, and it's like, I'm frustrated about it as well. Like I said already, the ignorance of people and whatnot, but when I really think about it and look at all the details and, what the cause and effect and all that kind of thing, and the fact that, like, so many people, they're just like, they're struggling just with life in general. They don't have the spare mental capacity to be able to consider all these things. Like me personally, I wouldn't say I'm privileged because of it, but I don't have many obligations to other people, because of my own life choices. So I do have time to reflect on this. But all that aside, you're still criticizing people for chasing superficial pleasures instead of actually trying to fix issues such as climate change and growing wealth disparity, which antinatalists and Efilists are pointing out the obvious, where, like, they're saying these problems are only problems because, like, they're only problems for people who exist, and they're only problems caused by people who exist. So you're basically advocating for the creation of the problems you're complaining. You're advocating for the creation of the people who cause the problems that you then complain about those people for not doing enough to fix. How does that make sense? See, it's just, this is why. Anyway, I suppose I'll carry on with this. Nevertheless, I think it would be myopic to ignore the indescribably beautiful and positive moments of life. Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's people aren't ignoring that. Well, I'm definitely not ignoring that. But they're few. The point is, they're few and far between. And there's no equation. There's no equation between the horrific suffering and this, what you call indescribably beautiful and positive moments. Like, those indescribably beautiful and positive moments don't really exist, like, without the indescribably horrific moments. They just don't. You need a point of comparison, so you can't have one without the other, and one, like, outweighs the other by far. Here's this simple comparison. Say, like, I'm not sure which country it was from, somewhere in Africa, I'm sure, but yeah, you know, just this short video of a guy who's been punished for something, you know, whether he was guilty of it or not, whatever it was, is kind of like beside the point. But you know, this guy's basically been tied to a washing line, you know, just sort of hung there, so he can't. Yeah, he's tethered, you know, he can't get away, and and yeah, he's just had his hand chopped off, and his hand's like just hanging on the washing line next to him, and you know, this guy's dead. Like, what justifies that? What justifies the act of creating someone who's completely innocent to begin with, and it's only ever their life circumstances, that, you know, their life circumstances, their biology, all the environmental factors that cause them to become that person. Let's say he did commit that crime that caused him to become that person in the first place, and then he gets punished. He gets his hand literally chopped off for things that weren't in his control. And you're saying these quote unquote indescribably beautiful and positive moments of life somehow make up for that. Yet I'll guarantee you that you would never swap places with that person. Neither would you be able to enjoy any of what you call these indescribably beautiful and positive moments of life. Say there's like, oh, I don't know, it's the most, you know, spiritual thing that somebody could experience. You know, it's profoundly deep, meaningful, seemingly meaningful experience, whatever that might be. You know, sunset, mutual, you know, like simultaneous orgasm with somebody you love. Any of these things, like if you were next to that situation, you were next to this poor man having his hand chopped off, right? What would be consuming your attention? It wouldn't be what you call these indescribably beautiful and positive moments of life that you wouldn't be able to maintain your attention on that, right? You would be drawn to this horrible, horrific fucking punishment that's happening for, like I already said, for something somebody did that is just a product of cause and effect, was not there, you know. They weren't born with this intent to do whatever they apparently, allegedly did to warrant that punishment. Hope that makes sense. So it goes on. I don't think that the life of the man in the iron lung who continues to hold on should not matter. Well, Ephilists aren't saying it doesn't matter. Who's saying it doesn't matter? To ignore the Buddhist monk who calmly sits whilst being on fire for the sake of fulfilling his purpose would be a sign of a worldview that is ultimately limited. No, it really wouldn't. Like, you're the one appealing to what, like, how many monks have done something like this, especially in comparison to the general population, like the vast number of people who couldn't sustain that. And isn't that the fact he can sit there calmly, as you say, while being on fire for the sake of fulfilling his purpose? That's just a product of training. That's something he's you know, dedicated his whole life to be able to do that, train his body to withstand that amount of pain. For what purpose? What has that done for the world? You know, if anything, it could have made people more zealous about their cause. You know, I mean, you can't show me what comes out of that. What was the benefit of that? And again, it's a situation that never needed to exist. Non-existent beings have no desire to exist or not exist. Yeah, true. Which is why I don't think that their creation can be a harm or benefit for them. However, if preventing all the negatives is good, then erasing the possibility of all positives is also unethical. No. Right. Non-existent beings have no desire to exist or not exist. Correct. Which is why I don't think that their creation can be a harm or benefit for them. Well, no, not for the non-existent person, but you're the one advocating for changing the state of non-existence to one of existence. So you have to deal with that you like, whereas antinatalists or Efilists are maintaining the same state of non-existence, where there is no harm or benefit for the non-existent person. You're the one advocating for the changing that situation and making the non-existent person existent. That's the guarantee that they will exist. So you don't treat them, there's no logical reason to treat them as a non-existent person. You treat them as an existent person because that's what they're going to be. Right? Ugh, dumb. However, if preventing all the negatives is good, then erasing the possibility of all positives is also unethical. No, because you're preventing the guarantee of negatives. Right? That's good. Erasing the possibility of all positives is also unethical. No, it's not. Because it's a possibility, not a guarantee. And like you've already said in the sentence prior to this, the non-existent beings have no desire for the positive. So how can it possibly be unethical? Right, continuing. It might not be just for anybody to suffer, but neither is it. It might not be just for anybody to suffer, but neither is it unjust for them to be happy. If it's unjust for innocent people to experience harms, it's also just that they experience positives. Yes, again, one's guaranteed, the other's just a possibility. The suffering's guaranteed. The happiness is not. Plus, pretty much all of the happiness you're ever going to experience is built out of the alleviation of suffering, the alleviation of some negative circumstance that is the default. You're the one who's ignoring things. You're the one disregarding certain, undeniable facts. And if it's just to eliminate suffering, it's also the epitome of injustice to not care about the innumerable people who cherish their lives despite of the harms they face. Yes, but it's not about just them and their personal cherishing of their lives. It's about the cost of their lives. Like, you think about it, some of the people who cherish their lives the most are the people doing the most amount of harm to other people. So you're the one with the narrow perspective. You're the one not considering the big picture. You're not considering the cost of the cost that is paid for by other sentient creatures to give these people who quote unquote cherish their lives despite the harms they face the ability to cherish their lives. It's not free. Right. Unquestioningly following the doctrine of unbridled pessimism that comes from a biological aversion to pain doesn't seem like a great idea to me. It's not a doctrine. How is it a doctrine? unbridled pessimism that comes from a biological, it's not a biological aversion to pain, you fool. It's a consideration for the welfare of other beings. It's a cost-benefit analysis. Oh, way to misrepresent and just strawman things, man. You have never even dealt with the essence of the Efilist argument, have you? And I don't think you're capable of doing it. Because you clearly haven't experienced very much suffering. Either that or you've rationalised it and downplayed it to such a degree. Which of course is just your programming, basically, right? It's just your programming. Just a survival mechanism. So that's a little bit of projection there, I think. Isn't it your biological aversion to pain that's causing you to do, causing you to spend so much time writing all of this, to desperately try and justify life. It's crazy. Oh, it doesn't seem like a great idea to you, no? Okay. That doesn't mean anything. True compassion lies in being able to see the world in its entirety, not just the aspects that seem more prominent to us. Right, well, I've already been over this. If it's you, put you in that situation, like already described with the man with his hand cut off. If you were, experiencing a moment of indescribable beauty, right, and you heard this man scream, what would draw your attention? Which would be more prominent? Right, it's just so damn obvious. Which would be more prominent, which would draw your attention, would be the man having his hand chopped off and screaming. There's no way that you could possibly be undistracted by that. There's no way that wouldn't just piss all over your indescribable positive moment of beauty. And you know that. So why do you go to such lengths to try and ignore that fact? And to, basically to try and brainwash other people to believe it, Right. As always, Gary applies arbitrary double standards to suit his agenda. He says that natural selection doesn't possess justice or any idea of dignity. Yes. However, how exactly can he then call it a dictator? Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh, well, I see, we're going into semantics. Dictators intentionally misuse their... right, the dictionary definition, is that what you base it on? Oh, no, this isn't entirely accurate, so therefore we can dismiss the whole point. Jesus, you're fucking stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is just stupid. This is ridiculous. Dictators intentionally misuse their powers in order to gain success and harm others. Well, obviously, he's not saying that it has conscious intent, is he? It's a metaphor. It's a personification of natural forces to make a point. To show that if it was a conscious being, it would be one of the worst dictators we have ever seen. How can, you're the one disregarding reality for your own psychological comfort, and you're projecting that onto other people, and and just because you've got the vast majority of people biologically predisposed to be on your side because they're alive, right, and they're subject to their survival instincts and all of that stuff, you somehow think you're winning the argument. This is ridiculous. Right, so dictators intentionally misuse their powers in order to gain success and harm others. But I don't think that there's any evidence for the idea that natural selection is deliberately causing harm. It doesn't matter whether it's deliberate or not. The point is, it's the harm. I don't ever know why so much emphasis is placed on what was their intent. Isn't the outcome more important? Surely the outcome is more important. But I don't think that there's any evidence for the idea that natural selection is deliberately causing harm to others due to the malevolence pervading its non-existent mind. No Efilist is making that argument. Come on. Even though I disagree with Efilism and universal antinatalism, I firmly believe that it's important that we look into fixing the issues currently afflicting us. Right, so do most Efilists and most antinatalists. Right? But you're ignoring the fact that they're advocating for the prevention of these problems ever arising in the first place. And you're advocating for the creation of them, and then you want to... So it's the simple metaphor, the simple way of phrasing it that Inmendham uses, which, there isn't a better one. You're making a mess to clean up a mess. And you clean up the mess imperfectly, and you can never get rid of the echo of the suffering that happens in people's endeavours to clean that up. It's not, it's not possible. You're arguing for the creation of issues that will afflict us, but not even afflict us, will afflict posterity. And then you're complaining about people for not doing enough to fix the issues you're advocating for the creation of. I mean, how many times do I have to go over this? How do you not already know this? Oh, I think you do know this. You're just feigning ignorance and pretending it doesn't matter. The most basic fact doesn't matter. Or the indescribable positive moments of beauty somehow negate the most basic, obvious fact. The implementation of the implementation of ideas such as a liberal right to a graceful exit could also help reduce suffering significantly. Right. But you're still, even if that were the case, you're still making a decision you're still subjecting someone to risks without any consent. You're still imposing upon them. You're still I mean, how much? Just think about it. So, let's go with that. So somebody has a baby, and they, how long is it going to be before the baby that new human being can vocalise and articulate, hey, this sucks, I don't want to be here, I never asked for this, how do I get out, how do I leave, where's my option for a graceful exit? How much suffering do you think they're going to potentially endure before that moment, before they're even possible, if it's even possible to escape it? I mean, what are you going to do? This is stupid. Seriously stupid, isn't it? You can't compensate for them for all the suffering that they experience up until the point they can say, hey, I want to get out of here, I don't like this. The implementation of ideas such as the liberal right to a graceful exit could also help reduce suffering significantly. Yes, it could, but there's no need to create the potential for suffering in the first place, is it? Against people's consent. I notice both these comments are edited, so I don't know what they would have said originally and how much has been changed. But anyway, so the second comment goes, I think you might have missed the difference between actions pertaining to those who exist and those who do not. For the people who exist, causing unnecessary harms is not acceptable unless it has a much higher probability of resulting in a greater good for that person. Well, it's not just for that person though, is it? There's a collective that person affects everyone else around them and everything else around them. This is also important because those who exist don't require constant external intervention for living an adequately valuable existence. What does that even mean? This is also important because those who exist don't require constant external intervention for living an adequately valuable existence. But that's not an objective fact, is it? Some people need constant care, constant attention. Some people do like pretty messed up things just to get that attention. Like attention is basically the primary thing the kid needs for survival, and they will do anything to get it, right? If they don't get positive attention, then they will act out. Because negative attention is better than no attention. And I've seen it with people who that's clearly been what has worked for them to get the attention they need. They act negatively, and when they're a kid, the results of that are, they're far from inconsequential, but the consequences are minimal, right? They're not, the effects aren't huge. Once that person grows up, becomes a teenager, becomes an adult, and hasn't managed to deal with, or hasn't had any incentive or any to understand themselves, to deal with all that stuff, those consequences become far more significant, far more dangerous, and far more harmful to other people. Like pretty much everyone needs some kind of constant external, not intervention, but validation, right, for living an adequately valuable existence. However, as far as non-existent beings are concerned, one has to take into account the fact that inexistent souls have no desire to not exist. Right, they don't have any desire, period. So, there's no point in. What's the point in even discussing that? Whether they have no desire to not exist and no desire to exist. Irrelevant. You deal with the potential person that you're advocating for the creation of. You're advocating for changing the state of non-existence to one of existence. So you deal with them as an existent person, because we have the capacity, believe it or not, we have the capacity to understand what will happen in the future if we take a given course of action. If it's good to prevent potential harms, it's also not good to prevent all happiness. Wow, you've got that completely backwards. All harms. Harm is guaranteed, right? It's not potential, it's guaranteed. Happiness is the potential, not guaranteed. So you just keep pushing this forward as if it's it's just equal, it's just a balance, it's just yin yang, blah 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 blah. When it's not at all. You just ignore this basic fact, but that suffering's guaranteed. Nobody escapes it. And happiness is two major points about happiness. It's not guaranteed. It's completely disproportionate who experiences what. It deserve nothing to do with it. And also, happiness isn't free. It pretty much always will come at the cost of some other creature, right? Who will suffer harms in order for someone else to experience that happiness. So if your happiness comes at the cost of somebody else, then it's not just happiness, is it? So the prevention of it is also good. Because Right. Natural selection is undoubtedly brutal. Nonetheless, it has also led to the genesis. It's these same old platitudes, this same old empty, empty claims that don't stand up to any real scrutiny. You don't stand up to reality. You know, it has also led to the genesis of ineffably beautiful experiences. It's produced intelligent and compassionate people like you who care about others. Right, well, right. Yes, it has. But even if that were completely true, right, because there were a lot of people I really don't care about, right? Like, I have to try very hard to care about them. Like, it takes a lot of work to understand that basically, like, even the person I hate the most, even the people that I, just can't see any positive value that they bring to the world whatsoever. Like, I've been around people like that before, where I've literally seen the effects of somebody's actions in the world, and they just cause every single person around them to suffer horribly. They just, like, certain drug dealers, for instance, they're a slave to their own habit, and then they addict. They intend, like, for various reasons, they get everyone, like, they intentionally get other people, kids, addicted to something that's going to have a hold over them for the rest of their lives. So I don't like. I have to do a lot of intellectual consideration, reasonable, rational, dispassionate consideration to be able to empathise with those people at all. The basic thing, the basic reaction I have is one of disgust and anger and contempt. So, like, it takes work to be compassionate. It's not the default by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, and you subject me to enough stress, and pretty much like any other human being, right? You subject me to enough stress, and I won't be capable of being compassionate. You subject me to too much stress, and I'll be the opposite, right? I'll be the problem. I'll be the one causing harm to other people, as a product of, like, basically displacement, aggression, or, just to deal with, like, whatever pain I'm going through. If it's too much for me to deal with, like, then that's that's what biological organisms do. Look at what happens in it's an observable thing, displacement, aggression, right? So and it doesn't matter whether I care about others or not, because the amount of care I have is very impotent, right? No matter how passionately I might feel it, is very impotent, right? There's very, very little ability to really do anything to protect people and protect animals and all that from the harms they're guaranteed to experience. From the things I observe that happen to them that make me compassionate and very deeply sympathetic towards them, often to the point where, like, when I really consider it, it will bring me to tears. And part of the reason for that is the fact that it's a despairing, it's a that's a creator of despair, because as one of the worst feelings is seeing someone or something experiencing some horrific suffering and knowing you're absolutely powerless to do anything about it. So what's the point of my compassion? What is the point of it if it's impotent, if it can't really solve the problem, and it's also subject to change, right? The compassion is not a given with me or anybody else. I can be subject to pressures that will reverse that compassion and turn it into something else. In a moment of anger, you can do something that will damage someone else for the rest of their lives. And it doesn't matter how much compassion you have, you can't undo it. You cannot undo it. So, this is the thing, all these things you're saying, they appeal to people on an emotional level, but they're insubstantial. That's it. They don't have a huge amount of force behind them. They just don't have power to counter the opposite. They just don't. That's a fact. And I wish it wasn't, but it is. Right. I think that this aspect of natural selection is more than defensible. Even though it's not really a moral agent. Okay, if you think it's more than defensible, then you really need to do a better job of defending it, because again, you're advocating for the creation of problems and suffering and all that causes the whole need for people to be compassionate in the first place. The compassion is never going to be able to fix the horrific things that people experience. It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. Often that compassion ends up being people become addicted to sympathy and stuff, and no amount of compassion will ever change them, will ever fix whatever trauma they went through, and they end up using compassionate people, right? They just use it, they feed off of that compassion, and they manipulate people with it. Victimhood and sympathy is a form of currency, and people abuse it. I mean, I don't think, this is why it's so ridiculous, because you really don't have an argument. These are the lengths you have to go to.